On today's podcast, you'll learn 10 expressions so that you can excel in your next job interview in English. Welcome to
Aprender Inglés con Kevin y Craig.
Hello, and if you're a new listener to the podcast, you're very, very welcome. And if you're a regular listener, welcome back. My name's Craig, and here with me on this podcast today is my good friend Kevin from DeliberateEnglish.com. Welcome to the podcast, Kevin.
Yeah, thanks, Craig, for having me. Good to be here.
It's a pleasure to have you. And with many years of teaching between us, Kevin and I are here to help you improve your English and take it up to the next level. Now, listeners may have noticed, Kevin, that your accent is not from the UK. Where are you from?
That is correct. I am from Chicago in the United States.
So that gives you, the listener, lots of opportunities to compare our accents. I'm from London. Kevin's from the US, from Chicago. So you can compare the way we're speaking. And I hope the pronunciation will be useful for you. Now, for regular listeners, news on Reza is that he has recovered from COVID. But in the last 2 weeks, you've heard podcasts that Reza and I had in reserve for emergencies. So because I couldn't get together physically with Reza, those 2 episodes are the last 2 weeks that you heard. And I'm really thankful that Kevin is joining me this week. And we hope that Reza will be back next week as usual. Now, you're very lucky because Kevin is an expert in business English, and although Reza and I have spoken about job interviews before, Kevin and I are going to look at 10 useful common expressions that you can use to excel in your next job interview. But before we begin with our expressions, just to remind you that if you go back to episode 43, you'll be able to hear Reza and I speaking about how to have a job interview in English. And we also looked at some work vocabulary. So go to inglespodcast.com/43. And also in episode 58, we looked at some job interview questions. So again, inglespodcast.com/58. Links, as always, in the show notes. Kevin, before we start with our 10 expressions, can you tell the listeners what's on your website, what they can find there, and how they can use your website to improve their business English skills?
Yeah, absolutely. So my business, Deliberate English, is all about helping international learners who want to speak confident American English at work. So maybe you work at a job where you need to give presentations, or you need to talk to clients or your boss or your coworkers in English, and you just don't feel confident about it. You're worried that people don't understand you or that you don't understand them, and you get stuck in conversations. And so if that sounds like you, then as Craig mentioned, on my website, DeliberateEnglish.com, you can get a copy of my free guide, 3 Steps to Confidently Express Yourself at Work. And so with that guide, you'll learn about how to practice deliberately so you can finally start seeing progress and feeling confident at your job. Again, you can get that free guide at DeliberateEnglish.com.
And if you're at the gym or you're cycling, cleaning the flat, or walking the dog and you can't write that address down, don't worry. It will be in the show notes. The link to Kevin's site will be at inglespodcast.com for you. Now, let's start with our 10 expressions to excel in your next English job interview. We're going to introduce these 10 expressions one by one, explain what they mean, and also how to use them, and demonstrate how you could use them in an actual job interview in English. So to use an expression we've looked at before, Kevin, would you like to get the ball rolling?
I would love to get this ball rolling, Craig. Let's get it going. So imagine, Craig, that you started a new job. You got your first project, and it's something that you already know how to do, which might be surprising because, do you really have that many skills, Craig?
No, not really. I don't. Considering the age I have, how many years I have, I've got very few skills, but carry on, carry on.
So luckily, this is something that you know how to do. You don't need to ask questions about it. You don't need a lot of training to do it. You are able to hit the ground running, and everybody is happy. How does that sound?
That sounds fantastic. I can't wait to start my new job.
Exactly. And so the expression here is hit the ground running. And this is a great one that means you're ready to work and be successful at the beginning of a new job or at the beginning of a new activity. So you don't need a lot of training. You don't need a lot of time. You know what to do, and you can start and be successful.
So, Kevin, in what situations in the interview itself would a candidate use that expression to hit the ground running? Can you give a couple of examples?
Yeah, so this is great to use when someone is asking you about your past experience. And specifically, if you feel like that past experience is very relatable or will help you with the new job. So, for example, if I was applying to be a high school teacher and I have experience in the past working with teenagers, who, of course, are the people that go to high school, I might say, my experience working with teenagers will help me hit the ground running as a high school teacher. I could also say something related to a meeting at work. I could say, hey, I always hit the ground running before meetings thanks to the work that I do to prepare ahead of time. So again, it's a great way to tell the person that's interviewing you that your past experience fits well with the new job requirements. Does that make sense, Craig? What do you think?
It makes perfect sense. Let's practice then. Can you ask me a question as if you are the interviewer, and I'll try to use that expression in my answer?
Absolutely. But just keep in mind that I am going to judge you on this. So make sure you have your best answer ready. Okay.
Okay. I'll try to hit the ground running. Go on. Go ahead.
All right. How do you feel, Craig, that your past experience will help you with this new role?
Well, Kevin, as you can see from my CV, I have 25 years of teaching experience at many different levels. I'm also qualified as a Cambridge oral examiner at 5 different levels of speaking. So as you can see from all of my experience, I won't have any problem at all to hit the ground running with whatever classes you're offering me at your school.
Perfect. You're hired.
Thank you. Fantastic. I need a new job. Right now, and I hope that I'm going to be a good fit for your company. Now, that's my first expression, to be a good fit. To be a good fit. Now, you may have come across, you may have seen or heard this word fit before, the verb to fit, when we speak about clothes. Oh, this shirt fits me, but these shoes don't fit me. They're too big. But if you use this idiomatically when you're speaking about a job, in a similar way, you're thinking that it's right for you, it's correct for you, it's comfortable for you. For example, Kevin and I have done a couple of live streams together, and that's why I knew that he would be a good fit for this podcast, because he can really help you with your business English. So if you're a good fit for a situation or for a company, you'll be very comfortable in your role. It suits your skill set. It suits your personality. It suits your abilities.
And so, given what you discussed, what sort of questions do you think this expression is a good one to use in your answer? Like, what type of things in a job interview might someone ask you where you would say that you want to be a good fit or that you would be a good fit?
Well, I think when they're describing the role to you and what your responsibilities would be, what kind of team you'd be working with, what you'd be doing on a day-to-day basis, and also perhaps if the company's speaking about their culture and how they operate and how they work on a day-to-day basis. So it's just as important for you, the interviewee, to decide if you're a good fit for the company that it is for the company to decide if you're a good fit for them. So you need to fit well together. Let me ask you a question, Kevin, and see if you can use this in a context.
All right, let's hear it.
Okay, are you ready?
Ready.
Kevin, why would you consider yourself a suitable applicant for this position?
Well, Craig, based on our discussion, this position clearly requires a lot of creativity. And as you can see from my YouTube channel, I love being creative, which is why I know I'll be a good fit for this position. What do you think of that answer?
I think it's fantastic, and I have seen your YouTube channel, and I do think you would be a very good fit because you are a creative person.
Exactly. Thank you.
You've got the job.
Perfect. All right. Well, I guess we're already hired on both sides, so we're done today, right? Have a nice rest of your day. Bye.
Let's go home. Yep. So what's the next expression or the next word?
Craig, this time I want you to imagine that you work with clients, and one of them has a problem. They got the wrong order. And it wasn't your fault this time, so that's good news. But
I'm pleased to hear that.
Yes. And so they got the wrong order, and they've called for help before, but nobody helped them. But thankfully, this time when they called and they talked to you, you were able to leverage your relationships with managers at the company to fix the problem. And so leverage is the word here. And this means that you are able to use something that you already have to achieve something new or better.
So leverage is using something to your advantage or to the client's advantage or to the customer's advantage in order to give a desired result.
Exactly.
That's a really useful word, Kevin. So how could we use that in a situation? Could you give us a context where this would appear?
Yeah, for sure. So we typically leverage experiences, relationships, or knowledge. And so this is a really good expression to use when somebody's asking you about how you might have solved problems in the past, or what are some of the things that you can use to be successful at your new job. So for example, if someone asked me, what can I do to be successful at the job that they're hiring me for? I might say, if you hire me, I can leverage my knowledge of statistics to help us create more accurate reports. Or maybe I'm applying to be a salesperson. I could say, as a salesperson, I could leverage my relationships with CEOs or the leaders of companies to help us grow the business. So it's all about showing how the skills that you have can help the new company achieve its goals. So Craig, it's your turn. Let me ask you a question here and see if you can use leverage in your answer. You ready?
Yeah, I'm ready. Let's go.
All right. Craig, what was one of the most challenging problems you've faced at work, and how did you solve it?
That's a very good question. Let me think about that for a second. Well, when I was working at McDonald's, they had a reputation many years ago for unhealthy food. And I was responsible for introducing salads into the menu. So I promoted healthy eating. Vegetarianism had become very popular at the time. And this health approach gave us leverage to compete in the market. And also, we changed the branding color from red to green, which was my idea. And we used green to leverage sales to the more health-conscious customer and consumer.
Wow. Is that a true story, or did you make that up?
I have worked at McDonald's, but it was in my summer holidays when I was 17. I had no connection with the branding or introducing salads, but somebody must have. Somebody must have thought, hang on a minute, let's leverage this and let's try and attract people who are becoming more health conscious.
Well, that was a very impressive answer. I mean, you fooled me for sure. So I guess there's another interview tip for everyone. Have Craig's confidence when you give your answer, and you can convince anyone of anything.
What about this for an example for leverage? I saw my boss taking drugs in the men's toilet. That gave me leverage to ask for a raise in salary.
Yeah, you could.
Maybe not in a job interview.
Maybe not in a job interview, but technically you would be leveraging that situation to get your raise. So good use of the word, but probably not a good story to tell in your interview.
Yeah, maybe blackmail would be more appropriate there rather than leverage.
Exactly.
Okay, so that's leverage. Now, on to the next expression, which is to go the extra mile. To go the extra mile, which means to make a special effort to achieve something, to go that extra bit of distance. Now, Kevin's a really nice guy. He's always ready to go the extra mile for his friends, doing above and beyond what's necessary. Kevin always goes the extra mile and does favors for his friends.
Can I hire you to do my marketing? That's really nice of you to say. Jeez.
Yeah, I'll change your branding color to green, maybe.
That's your specialty.
And a good teacher always goes the extra mile for his or her students. So you do something a little bit extra. Maybe instead of just correcting writing with a pen or a pencil, you create a video and you explain to the students how they can improve their writing. So that's going the extra mile, doing something a bit special, a bit extra to benefit somebody.
Yeah, that's a great one. And I definitely use this all the time. A lot of the coworkers I worked with in the past do. Craig, of course, where do you see this fitting in the context of a job interview? What types of questions would you see this as a good answer to?
Well, it could be an answer to many different questions, and it's signifying to the employer that you're happy to do what it takes, not only to make your managers satisfied with your work and your bosses, but also to make the customers and the clients appreciate the company more. So it could be, for example, in answer to how you would deal with a difficult or tricky situation, maybe answer a complaint or something like that. And going the extra mile would make the customer happy and come back and give you more business. So going the extra mile is giving the customers more than they expect. So let me ask you a question, Kevin, and see if you can use this in a pretend job interview. Are you ready?
Yeah, let's do it.
Kevin, in what ways do you think you'll be able to make a difference in this position?
Well, Craig, one of my biggest strengths, as you just mentioned, is always going the extra mile to make sure our clients are happy. I won't stop at just the minimum requirements. I'll learn what they truly need and design solutions that are a perfect fit.
That sounds amazing. When can you start?
How's next Tuesday for you?
Why don't you go the extra mile and start tomorrow?
Wow, I don't know if I want to work for a boss like that. Geez, very demanding.
Yep, I am.
All right. Well, hey, you just put me in a somewhat stressful situation there. So let's talk about a phrase that we can use to describe how one might be able to think when they're in a stressful situation. So, Craig, imagine that you're about to start a presentation. Your boss was supposed to be there and she was supposed to be your audience, but she never came. And so now your audience is just coworkers. No problem. You think on your feet and decide to skip a few of your slides that you made for your boss and focus only on the parts that are interesting for your colleagues. So how would you feel in that situation? Would that be a little stressful for you?
That would be stressful, yeah. But using that expression, thinking on my feet, maybe I would ask one of my coworkers to video the presentation and then I could email it to my boss.
Exactly. That's a great example. And so, as you might tell from our examples here, think on your feet means that you are able to have good ideas and can make decisions quickly in difficult or stressful situations where most people would be too overwhelmed or nervous to make a decision. But if you're good at those situations and continuing to be successful in those situations, then that means that you're good at thinking on your feet.
Okay, Kevin, that's great. So can you give an example of a situation in which you could use this in an interview?
Yeah, so this is a great one to talk about if somebody asks you about maybe your strengths or your weaknesses or how you feel about working in a company where a lot of changes happen a lot. And so, as I think Craig mentioned earlier in the podcast, you want to make sure that you are a good fit for the company, but you also want to make sure if the company is a good fit for you. And so if you don't like thinking on your feet or you are not good at thinking on your feet, then this is a good one to use if they ask about your weaknesses. Because, of course, you want to let the company know what you're willing and able to do and what you're not willing and able to do. Because if you don't, then you might end up taking a job that is not a great fit for you and your life becomes very disappointing. So I might say this in an answer to a question in an interview like, I'm great at thinking on my feet. Anytime something goes wrong, I can figure it out. Or I could say, I used to hate thinking on my feet, but then I learned that making no decision is sometimes worse than going with your best guess. Does that make sense?
That makes a lot of sense. And we'll speak a little later about how to speak about your weaknesses, because I think that's a question that tends to confuse and stress a lot of people going for job interviews. So we'll touch on that a bit later. But why don't I ask you a question? No, why don't you ask me a question and see if I can use this in a situation, a job interview situation?
Yeah, for sure. So this is a question that you might hear in a job interview, and it goes, how would you feel about working in a fast-paced environment? And just in case anyone doesn't know what fast-paced means, that just means that you're in a job where change happens all the time. There aren't a lot of specific predictable rules and tasks that you have. Maybe you're doing something different today than what you're going to do tomorrow and the next day. So that's a fast-paced environment. And so, Craig, again, the question for you is, how would you feel about working in a fast-paced environment?
I would be very, very happy to do so. In fact, I tend to choose jobs because they have fast-paced environments to work in. I like unpredictability because it keeps me on my toes. In fact, I believe that in today's competitive world, thinking on my feet really gives me an edge against the competition, and it stops the company becoming complacent. Because one danger, I think, with a small company such as this is that it could stagnate if it doesn't move with the times, and they could lose market share. So I like to think on my feet, and I like to be ready to change on a daily basis.
Yeah, very nice. And I actually had to laugh there a little bit because you said you like to be on your toes as well as thinking on your feet. It's funny how we have these expressions about feet to talk about like making fast decisions and stuff like that. But I guess it makes sense. If you're thinking on your feet or if you're on your toes, it means you're ready to run and do whatever you need to do.
Hit the ground running.
And hit the ground running. Yeah, I guess we should have called this episode 10 expressions about your feet or something like that.
Yeah. How did you get the boot from your last job? Yeah. The shoes on the other foot.
Oh, man. I think we could start a whole podcast just about idioms with feet.
Sock it to me. Now, embracing change is my next expression. And Kevin touched upon change in the last example. Now, the verb to embrace, 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 is very similar to hug. If you hug someone, you put your arms around them. Embrace is very similar, although one difference is collocation. For example, you might get the collocation, a passionate embrace with two lovers, but you wouldn't get a passionate hug. That's not so common. Now, when you embrace change in a similar way, in an idiomatic way, you put your arms around change. You welcome it. You bring it to you. You hold it close to you with affection. So to embrace change is a very positive way to think about change. You see it as a positive thing, an opportunity to improve yourself and try new things. Because sometimes we get set in our ways. We get very fixed in the way we work and the things we believe in. Now, change is scary. It's a bit frightening sometimes, but it's also useful and inevitable because things always change. You can't avoid change in your life. So embracing change is a very positive skill to have, a very positive trait in your personality.
So where do you expect to use an expression like this when you're in a job interview? Is this something that you would talk about as a strength, or do you see it fitting in like a different way?
Well, you spoke earlier on about a company having a very fast-paced environment where maybe if you imagine a company that's developing computer software, for example, maybe they have what's called a sprint where they work on a particular part of the software and then they have to change direction perhaps because the result is not what they expected. So this idea of constantly changing, thinking on your feet, being on your toes is uncomfortable to some people. So the interviewer might ask you about what you feel about change. So embracing change is a very positive thing. And it's a thing that is not very common among older people, perhaps. I don't know if you agree with that, Kevin.
Yeah, I mean, it does tend to be a little more difficult, right? Especially when it comes to technology. But I guess, and Craig, I'm curious to get your opinion on this, but while we are teaching you all these expressions today, that doesn't mean you have to use them if you don't actually feel this way, right? Like, I think it's very important in a job interview to be truthful because it helps not only the company know if you're a good fit for them, but if the job is a good fit for you. And so if you are truly a person who embraces change, then absolutely use this expression. But if you're not, then be honest about how you feel about a fast-paced environment or things like that. Would you agree, Craig? Or
Absolutely, because as much as you may want the job, if the job isn't a good fit, you'll realize that quite quickly. The company will realize that quite quickly, and then you've wasted everybody's time. And it's not a good idea to accept a job that you're not a good fit for. So always tell the truth, but be positive about it and say how you feel. And using these expressions, if they are true for you, will help you to communicate your message a bit clearer.
Perfect. Well, guess you got a question for me, right? Let's see if I can communicate my ideas clearly.
Okay, you're in the hot seat again, Kevin. Okay, so Kevin, how well do you see yourself adapting to the company's culture?
That's a good question. And while I know that working for a large company like this is different than my personal experience working as a freelancer or in my own company, I do embrace change and I'm excited to experience a new way of working.
Is that true? Do you like change as a person?
Well, I mean,
Or are you a creature of habit?
Well, prior to teaching English, I had worked for 12 years in corporate IT or in technology sales, selling software. And then last year, I decided to quit that job and focus full time as an English teacher. So yeah, I would say that I do like change. I embrace it. And sometimes even big changes are something that are interesting to me. So yes.
You've given the perfect example, and I know that to be true. So I think you are a person who embraces change positively, definitely.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It keeps life interesting, right? Variety is the spice of life. There's a bonus expression for you. Variety is the spice of life.
Regular listeners will remember that from last week with Bear. We did look at that expression, variety is the spice of life. Okay, what's your next expression, Kevin?
Okay, well, Craig, I know that you love your job, right? Because every day you get to work on the front lines helping your students improve their English, right? You love working with regular people and seeing them improve. So the expression here is on the front lines. And this means that you work in a job where you have direct experience or you're directly working with ordinary people or clients. So, for example, if you're a teacher, then you are a frontline educator because you talk directly to students. However, the principal of the school or the superintendent or the boss, we would not say that they are on the front lines because their job is to manage the teachers, not work directly with the clients. Or if you're a salesperson, you work on the front lines dealing with clients, but someone who works in accounting in your company is not on the front lines because they're not working with the clients. They're working with the data and the numbers within the office itself. Does that make sense, Craig? What do you think?
It does make sense. And you'd use this expression connected to client work or customer work where you're actually meeting the customers and consumers maybe face to face or on the telephone. Is what kind of situation would you use this expression in?
Exactly. So if you're applying for a job like at a call center, for example, or you're applying for a job as a teacher or as an educator, right? This is a good expression to use to talk about the experience that you have. But there is also an extra way that you can use this expression. And that's where you can say that you work on the front lines. If you work in a role where very important, interesting, or new things are happening in a field. So, for example, I could say, I work on the front lines of finance because I'm helping to develop a new app that uses Bitcoin, right? So Bitcoin's this new technology, it's exciting. And so if you're doing something with it, then you're on the front line. So you're doing something very new, important, interesting, and exciting. So that's another way that you can use this expression if you want to share with the person that is interviewing you that you have experience with a lot of new concepts or new technology within a specific field. Of course, like I mentioned, the original definition I gave was all about working directly with individual clients or people. And so in my case, I could say in the past, I worked on the front lines teaching English to immigrants. So again, two ways you can use this one. One is to talk about working with ordinary people, clients, and the other is to talk about doing new and exciting things in a particular field.
Okay, so that's clear. Now let's put this into a context. Can you ask me an interview question and see if I can answer you with this expression on the front lines?
Absolutely. And I'm curious to see which of the two definitions you use. So here we go. Craig, do you have any direct experience working with clients?
Yes, I do. In fact, when I worked in the UK, in London, I worked with my parents in a family business, which was in an open air market, a Sunday market. And my parents sold toiletries, shampoo, deodorants, soap, that kind of thing. And serving people and meeting clients on a weekly basis gave me a lot of experience because you have to learn how to be very helpful and very friendly. You need to identify the client's needs and give them the correct product. Of course, you have to deal with any complaints that might arise and also create customer loyalty so that the customers come back the following week to buy more shampoo. So I really was on the front lines for many years dealing with customers face to face, and market customers can be difficult to please sometimes. So I think I will be able to leverage my experience of being on the front lines to help me with this position.
Wow, you get bonus points for sneaking in another expression there. Leverage.
Did you see what I did that? Got leverage there as well. Yeah.
I did. Wow. Excellent.
Okay, so moving on to my next one. And it's similar to one we've had before. Now, this one is to take responsibility for continuous development, which is quite similar to embracing change if you think about it. So let's break this down. To take responsibility, that's a common collocation. We use the verb take with the noun responsibility. And continuous development, so you're developing as a person. You can develop professionally in business, or you can develop personally or spiritually. So there are many ways in which you can develop as a person, and you want to do that continually. So again, to take responsibility for continuous development. If you stand still in life, you stagnate. And stagnate, if you can imagine a pool of water that doesn't move, it just sits there and goes green and horrible, and you can't drink it because the water's bad. That's stagnation. So if we don't move forward in life, personally and professionally, we go backwards, and that's never good.
I think that this is a particularly important one and a very true one for your listeners here, because if you're listening to this, you clearly are taking responsibility for continuous development with your English, right? So this is something that everybody listening to this right now is doing, and you can definitely use to talk about yourself when you are in a job interview.
Yeah, that's a good point. Now, you might have a wonderful, fantastic boss who pushes you forward, who sends you on professional courses, who mentors you, who guides you. And you might have a wonderful partner in life who helps you develop and grow as a person. But you also need to take responsibility yourself for your own continuous development. Self-study, setting goals and achieving your goals, being in the company of people who can teach you things. And if you communicate that to the employer, it's a very positive thing to have, a very good trait to have. You agree with that, Kevin? Yeah?
I do. And I guess I'm curious as well. So, a lot of times different companies will offer some of their own training opportunities, right? And there may be an expectation that you do that. How do you see this fitting in with that? Or would you have any concerns about using this when you know that that company offers training because you're worried they might think that you're going to do your own things and not listen to their training? Or do you feel this is something that can maybe complement what they offer at their company?
Well, I can only speak from personal experience. And in the school I used to work at, the British Council, they did have their in-house training, but there were lots of trainings that didn't apply to me and the career path that I was on. And I explained this to my boss. At some point in my time working there, these trainings were compulsory. And I said I prefer not to get paid to go, because I don't teach children. I don't intend to teach children. So I don't see the point in sitting in a training session that's focused on teaching children. I'd much rather study something myself and research something myself that's directly applicable to my own classroom teaching. So I think you have to be very clear where you're going in your career and communicate that clearly to the company. And if the company is a good company, they should, and I hope you agree, Kevin, they should support you and help you to go in the direction that you want to go.
Yeah, I would agree with that as well. And, in my personal experience, a lot of times companies do offer a lot of benefits where you can get free access to training on different websites like LinkedIn or others, but not everybody takes advantage of them. And so if you are somebody who takes responsibility for your own continuous development, I do think that's a strength, especially if they do offer trainings that are sort of optional, because it lets them know that you are somebody who cares, that you will take advantage of the benefits they're offering and be able to improve the way that you work because of it.
Yeah, that's very true. Okay, so shall we practice this? I've got a question for you. Are you ready?
I'm ready. Let's go.
Kevin, how do you see yourself growing in this role?
Well, I believe that to be successful in the modern workplace, you constantly need to be learning new things. And personally, I take responsibility for my own continuous development by participating in conferences and other training opportunities that this industry has to offer.
I think that's an excellent answer, and you've got the job. Congratulations.
Well, Craig, I would like to know if I could get that in writing, right? So I love the offer, but I don't know if I trust that you're going to not change your mind after this interview. So could you please give that to me in writing?
Well, I noticed that that's our next expression. So why don't you explain why it's important to get that kind of offer in writing? Why ask for it?
Exactly. So when we use the expression get something in writing, this is the most common and professional way to ask for a written confirmation of something that someone at the interviewer's company said to you. And this is usually a job offer or the salary that they're going to offer you, right? And it's important to do this because, especially in larger companies, there are a lot of people that you have to work with when you're applying for and working to get a new job. So it's not just that, people are going to be bad and try to change what they said to you, but sometimes there's just a breakdown in communication, right? So somebody might offer you a job or a salary verbally in an interview, but then forget to tell the HR department that that's what they offered you. And so when you finally do get the official offer, it's different, right?
Yeah, there's confusion.
Exactly. And so if you have that written confirmation, then if there is confusion, you can just forward them the email and say, hey, this doesn't match what Craig told me in the interview. He said that I would get the job and he was going to pay me $1 million a year. So here's the proof. Like, what happened?
Yep. The first ever English teacher to get $1 million. So it'd be rather nice. But
Well,
and then the interviewer could blame the HR department. The HR blames the interviewer, the manager. So it's a whole mess just because there's nothing in writing that you can point to and say, hey, this is the offer. Please honor what you've put in writing here.
Right. And there's very easy ways to use this one. You can just say, hey, can I get that in writing? I'd like a copy for my records. Or maybe if you are the person doing the interviewing, you could say, hey, I'll send you an email with everything we discussed today so you have it in writing. Okay, so I can get things in writing, and I can also give someone something in writing so that they have it in writing, right? I have something in writing. I would like to get something in writing. Those are some common collocations there.
Yeah, and I think this is especially important for people who don't have English as a first language. If English is a second language for you, which it probably is if you're listening to this, then sometimes if there's a phone conversation or if you're face-to-face in a job interview or even on Zoom or Skype, you might not 100% understand, or you think you've understood, but maybe there's a small thing that you've missed. If it's in writing, you can take your time, you can check all the vocabulary, you can read it, you can reread it. And also, as Kevin said, you have proof of what the information is of the offer. So it's especially important, I think, if you're not a native English speaker.
Yeah, and that's actually a really good point. And to be honest, even if you are a native English speaker, it's always a good idea to ask for details of a very technical offer or some sort of conversation that you had. I mean, even myself, I'll ask for things in writing or like a summary of a conversation if it was a very complicated or technical conversation and it's really important to have the details right. So definitely don't feel ashamed to ask for something in writing because, again, native speakers, we do it all the time when we want to confirm our understanding. So if you as a second language English speaker want to ask for something to confirm your understanding, ask for it confidently. There's nothing wrong with it, and native speakers do it too. Would you agree, Craig?
Absolutely. Yeah. Don't rely on a phone conversation. Always make sure that there's a follow-up email, an email that follows up with the details of what's been agreed or what's been discussed. So let's put this in a context, Kevin. Do you want to ask me a question and see if I can use this in an interview situation?
Yeah. And so, for example, let's say that we're getting close to the end of our interview. You've done a great job. And then I did make you an offer on that call or in that interview. And so I might ask you then afterwards, hey, do you have any questions about our offer?
Well, I think you've clarified everything that I had to ask already. The only thing is, Kevin, would it be possible for you to itemize the offer in an email after, just so that I have it written down and I can go through it? That would be very, very helpful for me.
Absolutely. I'd be happy to do that.
Thank you very much. Now, moving on to the last one. Well, actually, I have two for you. One is I'm improving this by, and the second one, I'm working on this by. Now, you may have noticed that both of the verbs there are in present continuous, and I want to ask Kevin if he agrees with me when I say that using the present continuous in a job interview sounds a little bit more dynamic, a bit more active than present simple. For example, I'm designing web pages for small businesses. Sounds a little bit more dynamic and active than I design web pages for small businesses. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, I mean, anytime you're using that continuous tense like this, it makes it, at least to a native speaker, sound like it's happening right now as we speak. You are actively doing these things, right? So there's nothing wrong with saying like, I design web pages, but that kind of just sounds like, yeah, maybe it's a part of your job responsibility. But if you say I'm designing websites for clients, that sounds like, hey, right now you might have like 5 different clients that you're doing this for. It's something that's actively happening. It's a part of your life. And like you said, it is definitely more dynamic.
Yeah, I agree. And I did promise earlier that we'd look a little about how you can answer questions that are directed at your weaknesses, things that you're not very good at. And some students tend to say that their biggest weakness is they're perfectionists or they're workaholics. They can't stop working. And as Kevin said before, come on, be honest, tell the truth. Are you really a perfectionist and a workaholic? There's nothing wrong with saying things you're not good at, but follow it up with how you're trying to improve and what you're doing to get better at your weakest parts of your job or your personality. Let me give you an example. Well, why don't you ask me, Kevin? Why don't you ask me about my weaknesses and I'll give you an example.
All right. So tell me about some of your weaknesses, Craig.
Well, Kevin, one of my weaknesses is I often take a long time completing a task. Sometimes it takes me longer than it should to get something done. And I'm improving this by using a time tracker on my PC. I use an app called Toggle so that I know how long each task takes me. And then I set a timer on my phone and I try to increase the speed of the task that I'm doing. This helps me to keep focused and make the best use of my time. So in that example, I've given a problem I'm trying to deal with at the moment, but I've continued to explain how I'm getting better at it using one of those expressions. I'm improving this by, or I'm working on this by.
Yeah, one thing I'd want to add there as well is that, as you mentioned, and as we've said multiple times on this episode, is honesty is important, and not only is it important for the reason of, like we said, we want to make sure that you're a good fit for the company and they're a good fit for you, but it's also important because you don't want to sound like you're a robot, right? If you Google like how to talk about my weaknesses, you might see like the same 5 or 10 things that everybody says, like, oh, I care too much, or I work too hard. And everyone's trying so hard to make their weakness sound like a strength. But the problem is it's so common that it's obvious that you're just, you're reading something that you read and it's not really true. And so when I've worked with my clients and my students in the past, especially around this question, I always do try to encourage that they are truthful, because you don't want to sound like you're just reading something online. You want to show them who you really are. And so, Craig, I guess if you want to ask me a question about it, I can give you an example of how not to necessarily sound like a robot as well.
Absolutely. Let's go. So, Kevin, what is your greatest weakness?
Yeah, so my greatest weakness is that I just really don't like doing a lot of research. I prefer to think on my feet using information that's readily available. However, I know that in many situations, taking more time to research a subject is important. And so I am working on this by following a checklist I made that asks me to confirm a few things about my work before I send it off to other people for their feedback, or I decide to publish it.
I think that's an excellent answer, and congratulations, extra points for including thinking on your feet.
Exactly. Thank you. I
Well
appreciate
done.
appreciate you noticing that.
Okay, so now let's go back and quickly run through our 10 expressions. Just to remind you, remember you can see these expressions in the show notes over at inglespodcast.com. So, Kevin, what was the first expression we looked at today?
The first expression was hit the ground running, which means you are ready to work and be successful at the beginning of a new activity. And it's a great way to tie your past experience to the responsibilities of the new job.
Number 2 was to be a good fit. And as you've seen, Kevin was a wonderful fit for this podcast because of his experience with business English.
Awesome. Expression number 3 was leverage, which means that you can use something you already have to achieve something new or better. It's a great way to talk about challenges you faced in the past and how you use the skills and resources you had to solve it.
Then we had to go the extra mile. And as you've seen today, even though Kevin said he doesn't like to do research, he really has gone the extra mile to present some excellent expressions for you.
Well, thank you, Craig. But I am also good at thinking on my feet. So, whether it's research or whether it's something that's a stressful situation where I got to decide something quickly, I am certainly good at thinking on my feet. Again, this one means that you have good ideas and can make decisions quickly in difficult or stressful situations. And this is an expression that you can use when you're either talking about your strengths or your weaknesses to make sure that the job is a good fit for you.
And embracing change is something that all of us should be working on to make sure we do more of. And look at you today. You haven't had Reza on the podcast. You've had Kevin. You've embraced the change of having a new person on the podcast, and you've nearly reached the end of it. So congratulations.
Yes, indeed. So, Craig and I on this podcast, we are working on the front lines by speaking with all of you. If you work on the front lines, that means that you work directly with ordinary people or clients. But it can also mean that you work in a role where new, exciting, and important things are happening. And Craig, I would say that we also work on the front lines of English education because, the internet is, in its course of human history, a pretty new thing, right? And so being able to adapt lessons into an online format, I would certainly think is something on the front lines.
Absolutely. We're on the front lines. We're on the cutting edge of English teaching online. And you, dear listener, are taking responsibility for your continuous development in English by listening to this podcast, by taking responsibility for self-study. You're continuing to develop your English skills. So well done.
Yeah. And just remember, folks, if somebody makes you an offer or a promise, you need to get it in writing. That was our 9th expression. And to get something in writing means that you want a written confirmation of it. So that way in the future, you can avoid confusion or problems if the offer or the information they send you does not match what you talked about on a live call.
And remember, if you're asked about your weakness in a job interview, please tell the truth, but also say how you're working to improving it. Another example, I personally get very nervous when I have to give a presentation to my work colleagues. Who doesn't get nervous when they have to give a presentation? But I'm working on this by doing a public speaking course, and I've also joined Toastmasters, which is an organization that helps people improve their public speaking, and you finished it on a positive note. And to finish this podcast on a positive note, we would like to hear from you. It's your turn to practice your English. Please send us a voice message. You can do that by using our SpeakPipe app. That's SpeakPipe, speakpipe.com/inglespodcast. Or send us an email. You can reach me, Craig, at inglespodcast.com. Or if you want to send Reza an email to see how he's doing, you can send an email to belfastreza, R-E-Z-A, @gmail.com. And we remind you about our online store where you can buy some courses to help you with your English. The address for that is store, store.mencioningles.net. Kevin, can you tell the listeners how Deliberate English can help them on their English journey?
Absolutely. So at Deliberate English, I help people speak confident American English at work. I work with clients to help them prepare for interviews, to help them give meetings and presentations at their job, to speak with clients, to write more professional emails. And I do all that in what's called the Deliberate English community. And so if you're interested in more information in that, if you need help with your English at work, then the best way to get in touch is to go to deliberateenglish.com. Get a free copy of my guide, 3 Steps to Confidently Express Yourself at Work. And that'll also put us in touch via email so we can start talking about how I can help you speak confidently at your job.
And I will, of course, include a link to Kevin's website on our webpage at inglespodcast.com. Thank you to all of you who are helping us by supporting this podcast on Patreon. You too can join our Patreon program for as little as $1.20 per month. That's including the VAT tax. And by doing this, you get instant access to recent transcriptions of this podcast. And you can read everything that Kevin and I have said. Go to patreon.com/inglespodcast for more information. And we don't have time to mention everybody who's supporting us, but we do want to say a huge thank you to Juan Miguel Marabel Gonzalez, Ana Robles, Marga Ariza, and Lucas Campos da Silva Moraes, our recent Patreon sponsors who have joined us this month. I'm not sure what we're going to be speaking about next week. I haven't recorded the podcast yet, but I really hope that Reza will be back. I know we've been missing him, and I want to thank Kevin hugely for stepping in this week and being on the podcast and helping listeners understand some very useful expressions that they can use in a job interview. Thank you very much, Kevin.
Thank you for having me.
So thank you very much for listening this week. It's goodbye from me.
And goodbye from me as well. Thank you for listening.
The music in this podcast is by Pitts. The track is called See You Later.